one wakes up expecting that to be the day everything changes. But that morning, Daniel's eyes opened before dawn, as if silence itself had decided to turn into a sound. It was a thin, high thread at the edges of the window frame, like wind strumming a wire. 5 and 18. The digits on the clock had the sleepy glow of an aquarium. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet placed on the cold floorboards as if he were testing the temperature of a river. His hand searched for Anna in the rumpled sheet and found only the faint cooling outline of her sleep. The hallway groaned in familiar places under his weight, a map of small complaints the house kept to itself. In the kitchen, a tired yellow bulb washed the counter with a nicotine light. Anna stood with her back to him, stirring coffee with the mechanical rhythm of someone who'd stirred soup as a child in a kitchen where arguments were more regular than meals. Her phone leaned against the tiled backsplash, black glass lit with an ongoing call without video. A male voice, half smothered by the speaker and by the distance, spilled into the room as if the house were a border it had no right to cross. He knew the voice instantly. Marcos. Brother first, manager later. Gravity in the family before he learned to speak in full sentences. Daniel poured water slowly, as if not to wake the quiet's larger animal. The thin stream rang in the glass. The call ended with the precise click of the stove's knob, as if that were the same gesture. She didn't turn when she spoke. "You're up early. Didn't sleep," he said, and blew on the mug because one must do something with one's breath when there's nothing left to say. Clara had a nightmare again. He had always felt that children carried their dreams like backpacks too big for their backs, straps cutting into small shoulders, and grown-ups forgot to offer a hand. Clara padded in, hair in a soft, wild cloud, eyes that were still half in a different room. The blanket trailed, gathering the dust. The broom never found. He crouched without thinking, his body's muscle memory of love, and gathered her up. Cheap shampoo and pillow. He closed his eyes for a second and held on to the smell. The condo fees had climbed like ivy no one planted, almost 65% higher since Marcos moved temporarily into their mother's house 2 streets up and took charge of the administration to bring order. A word like order has a clean, bright sound until it's used to cover up the bruise. Daniel didn't have a diploma, but numbers had always spoken to him in the plain voice of men who meant what they said. These numbers lied. He could hear it. But at meetings, when he lifted a hand with questions, he was patted on the head by grown boys in pressed shirts. That's not how it works. You don't understand the structure. The accountant shook his hand firmly and had the same last name as Marcos's favorite story about high school soccer victories. The maintenance company, too, was the sort of miracle. Coincidence that repeats itself near the same family. That morning, the unease put on a costume. It was a brown envelope pushed under the door, the bottom corner bent as if the news had caught on the roughness of wood. Notice of late payment. You would think ink was heavier than water the way Daniel's heart sank. He did math with his tongue pressed to his molars. The shower repair that promised heat and delivered shrugs. The clutch that died with a sigh in the middle of a left turn. The school deposit that smiled politely and asked 3 times. Stacks grew without anyone placing a hand on them. Weight arrived without ceremony. Outside, the August wind had woken up on the wrong continent. It snuck under doors and through sleeves, cold where it shouldn't be. It made the streets smell like metal, like a handful of coins. "I'll handle it," Daniel said, and he meant the sentence as a hand he placed on a wall so the house wouldn't fall. Anna slipped the strap of her purse higher on her shoulder. There was a tiny nick at the base of her neck, a line of white from a long-ago scrape, and he found himself staring at it because sometimes the only way to look at the present is to look at a past you didn't live. Just don't start a fight with Marcos. He smiled with no teeth, a patch of sky without sun. "I won't. I'll ask for receipts." Her gaze held his for a count of 3, then looked away like a bird that had seen a window too late. "We'll talk tonight." He nodded because heads nod even when hearts don't. The day had begun early and already carried the color of evening. His office was 2 blocks from the house, above an electrical supply store that always smelled faintly of hot dust. He did papers, certificates, small registrations, the housekeeping of commerce. No one dreams of this work. It buys bread, not boats. He liked it because numbers say, "Thank you," when they are placed in the correct boxes. People rarely do. He called the administration. A secretary with a voice trained to smile answered, "Mr. Daniel, Mr. Marcos asks that all inquiries be sent by email." Mr. Marcos, the way small power likes to be addressed, like a suit jacket trying to make a man's shoulders bigger than they are. He wrote an email he could have written even if electricity were forbidden. Line items, contracts, projections. The reply arrived with attachments, PDFs flattened like secrets pressed between heavy books, photos of water tanks in flattering angles, bullet points that had been shined with a cloth, and then one line with an aftertaste. Further questions may be addressed at tonight's extraordinary meeting, 8 p.m. He opened the PDFs. He ran his finger over his jaw. Some numbers jigged where they should have marched. Services doubled as if they had twins. Emergency fees that reoccurred with the discipline of Sunday church. All roads that should have led to necessity curved toward a company with a handsome Latin name, Legatus Integrated Services. In the footer, the faint whisper of ownership, M.A.D. Santos. He said the letters out loud. They sounded like a cough held in. Marcos Antonio dos Santos. Sometimes the truth sits plainly in the corner of the room until someone decides to face the wall. In the afternoon, he went to Clara's school. He had learned that one must show one's face where one's child spends hours, that teachers do not call unless their mouths have already filled with worry. The teacher was young enough to be called Miss, without irony, tired enough to watch the clock without moving her eyes. She described the last weeks like someone trying not to scare a deer. Clara drifts. She chews the pencil. She jumps when doors open. He nodded and thought of how houses can be loud without raising their voices. Evening slid over everything like a sheet pulled by a careful hand. Anna came home early, which meant the day had been broken in a place she couldn't mend at work. She sat on the bed's edge with her phone. Scroll, scroll, scroll like a rosary for the faithless. The cover photo still insisted on a different universe. Clara with mango on her face. Sun like warm glass over shoulders and cheeks. A father's hand in shot because love never stays entirely behind the camera. Messages from Marcos snicked onto the screen. "I'll take care of it. He's anxious. Don't feed his paranoia." There are sentences that are meant to kill slowly. "I saw the spreadsheet," Daniel said from the doorway, the word spreadsheet too big for his mouth in a room this intimate. "And?" she asked, pinning hair up, exposing the long line of her neck that he had once traced with a finger to memorize where home began. "There's something wrong." A long breath, the kind that empties lungs of air and fills them with weather. "We can't start a war, my mother." The sentence dropped off a cliff. "I'm going to the meeting. What if he humiliates you? Then we'll know who runs this house." "It isn't a competition." He put on his jacket. Clara came, high in with a puzzle. A kitten missing the left eye. He put the board on the floor and felt the wood through his jeans. There's a way fathers fold their bodies that mothers call late pain. 30 years later. He held the missingness in his hand a second longer than he held a piece of cardboard. "Sometimes the piece that's missing feels like it was never there," he said as if he had always meant to tell her this. "But it exists." When he stepped outside, the air surprised him again. The cold had a city in it he did not live in. The meeting room smelled like paint and ambition. He has always thought ambition smelled like something you apply and then cannot scrub off your hands. The table had a long white runner that tried to be a river. Bottled water sweated. The projector refused to give enough light without being tapped, as if vision required violence. Marco stood in the center. Center is where he has always learned to stand. Family photos, school assemblies, offices in new buildings, with glass that watched itself. His shirt fit like a verdict. His smile could have sold sunlight to the sun. "As you all know," he began, and Daniel felt the room tilt toward the sound. "I stepped in to professionalize our processes. Delinquencies dropped, maintenance increased, and when you put a house in order..." He paused for polite laughter the room obediently provided. Some people get uncomfortable. A man in a cap looked down at his phone. A woman near the door wore a jacket that still had the store's fold line in the sleeve. Daniel raised his hand. He didn't feel brave. He felt tired in a way that made courage look like a place to sit. "Why is the emergency fee recurring for 8 months?" A few heads turned. Marcos smoothed his wrist. "We must be prepared for contingencies. Basic management. And why does the company that receives the fee list you as a partner?" The room changed shape without moving. Marcos's smile continued. The skin around his eyes did not. That is slander. Do you have proof? Daniel lifted the paper. Footers are where truths go to collapse and wait for someone kind. M.A.D. Santos. He placed the paper on the table the way you put down a knife when you'd rather hold it tighter. Enough to raise a question, and enough question to require an audit. The building manager, hair carefully careless, clapped an air of mediation onto the situation. We can align internally. No need to expose people. People, Daniel repeated. Half question, half echo. Or, interests? The temperature slid down like a hand down a railing. Marcos put his palms flat on the table as if pressing down a sheet that kept lifting in the breeze. He leaned toward Daniel and used a voice he had used since childhood. I understand your resentment. You've felt less since you didn't finish college. But here I resolve things. There are sentences that try to shrink the room around one person. Daniel felt that shrink. Thought of Clara chewing a pencil into a soft weapon. Thought of Anna folding herself around a silence because she had been trained to consider silence the only decent clothing. He thought of his father, who said once while nailing a frame, that a house is where nails go to sleep without fear of waking up pulled. He said with a voice that had to find its path past the roof of his mouth, I'm not swallowing this. He left before Marcos could pack the word defamation and push it across the table like a poisoned plate. The wind was waiting, amused to find a face drawn into night before it was time. It had the same teeth as the morning. At home, the TV flickered the way water looks as it goes down a drain. No sound. Anna's fingers were woven through her hair, a net she had made to keep something from falling further. He unpacked the meeting with square phrases you could stack. Fee, company, audit. She breathed in like a swimmer and spoke as if someone else had written the line for her and left it on the nightstand. You just turned my family against us. He tasted the word, your, before he corrected to our. That is how marriages wear down, pronouns dragging new furniture into old rooms. He wanted to ask the question a different way. He didn't. Our family needs you whole. I do too. Her silence had edges. I can't fight this with you. The sentence cut right where he was holding himself together. He slept on the couch. He didn't sleep. Lying still, he could hear the house breathe. He could hear the fridge cough, the wood settle, the neighbor snore. In the dark, his father's voice returned, from a workshop where patience smelled like oil. A house is the last place you should feel foreign. He didn't know whether to agree or to laugh. At 4, the decision rose like a bubble. He opened the laptop and typed the email he might have written years ago. Subject line like a knuckle on a door. Formal request for audit and document access. He CC'd 3 residents who still used words carefully and did not confuse certainty with volume. He opened a blank spreadsheet. Plan B. He typed 2 words in the first cell. Keep going. 2 days later, the reply had the exact cold he had prepared for. Access denied. Pursue legal channels. Marcos wrote on another channel where people say what they're unwilling to speak in daylight. You're crossing a line. Think of Anna. Think of your daughter. There are threats that pretend to be advice. He left to breathe because air inside had begun to feel used. He walked without deciding where. To walk and arrived where he often arrived when decisions were too loud to hear anything else. Olo Legato. The corner restaurant where heat had a shape and knives argued with vegetables in a sound that always felt like someone finally telling the truth. The oven exhaled a kindness he had forgotten heat could have. The cook at the counter moved with a precision that had nothing to prove. A man with forearms that had lifted life for years. A clean white scar that said knives are honest companions. If you are. On a small stool, a girl worked a kitten puzzle with her tongue resting against her lip, concentration making a face older than her years. The father did not look directly at her, which is how you watch most dearly. It's always the same missing piece, she told him without looking up. We'll find it, he said, blade never pausing as if finding were a motion of the hands more than the eyes. Daniel drank coffee poured by the owner, a man who seemed to have learned to speak only at the volume required to be heard by the person addressed. He said little. That is how little is best said. Care, truth, consistency, words you cannot sell. He felt a small adjustment inside, a picture frame straightened on a wall no guest would notice, the kind of fix that prevents the long slide. He printed everything that night and slid the papers into a clear folder the way people put jewelry in a dish after a wake. Anna stood by the window, shoulder to the glass, trying to lean the other way. He sat, opened the plastic, and laid it all out. Lines and names and dates. The soft body of the lie exposed without lights. No cruelty. "It feels like I'm fighting you," he said. "I know, but I'm fighting for the house. For you. For the debt that never shows up at a bank." She read. This is how you know someone wants to climb out of a hole. First they read. A line. Another. She looked up, and fear, which had been a sheet of glass, showed a crack that could let air in. "He's always solved things. For me," she said. And the sentence was a warm coat suddenly too heavy. "Since I was little, I thought that was love. Sometimes it's control," he said without accusation, because anything said with accusation becomes something else in the listener's ear. Control eats what silence cooks. She closed her eyes. The air entered. Then let's be loud. Morning is best for bureaucracy. They went to the precinct where the paint peels in a way tired enough to look permanent. They spoke to a clerk, whose eyebrows never learned to say surprise. They wrote down veiled threats and conflict of interest, where a form requires the world to fit in little boxes. At the prosecutor's office, the floor was cleaner and the words longer. Daniel called a colleague he trusted, a man whose glasses were always dirty and whose conscience wasn't. A reporter reached out, soft voice, sharper ears. He declined to talk into a microphone and sent documents into the same air through which rumors travel. Night brought them back to the room that had first squeezed around Daniel. Marcos arrived with the same smile, but it sat oddly now, like a clock hung a degree off. He scanned the exits the way people do when they finally notice they might need one. Daniel's legs felt the same as all other days, heavy and deserving of rest, but his voice seemed to have finally found the floor beneath it. "I'm not less without a diploma. I'm not less because I speak softly. This condo is not a family business. Contracts. Recurrences. Hidden partner. 4 bids denied without comment. External audit now. Clapping. Solitary, then joined." A throat cleared. The manager tried to put a hand on water. A gray-haired woman with a music teacher's hand stood. "My gate was broken for 3 months and I paid twice for emergencies. I would like to know why." The dam cracked not with a boom, but with the soft surrender of wet cardboard. Marcos's volume increased to fill the emptying spaces. He reached for labels. Manipulative, paranoid, ungrateful, and threw them like sticky notes that peel up at the corners when air insists. Then Anna stood, a woman who had been trained to fold. She unfolded. "Enough," she said, and the long line of the word leveled the room. "I won't be led by fear. We deserve transparency, and you don't run my life." Silence changed. Space appeared where there had been pressure. It is a strange thing to watch a room learn a new rule in real time. People checked each other's faces, found themselves. They're more than they had expected, like recognizing a relative in a crowd and suddenly understanding what your own nose has always meant. In the months after, truth did what truth does when it's given a path. The audit spoke the way numbers prefer to speak, calmly, firmly, with a date on the top of the page. The company was pushed out. Management changed hands. Marcos's messages came softer, then less. At some point, even guilt lost its appetite. Absence did what it always does when light is turned on. It scurried to the cracks. The house did not fix itself overnight. Houses never do. Tension leaves like steam. If you put your face over it, it fogs your skin before it goes. Clara stopped chewing pencils into soft arrows. She still woke too early some mornings, and on those mornings she asked to see the sky from the window. "It smells like clean laundry," she said once, and Daniel wondered whether hope is a smell more than a sight. They went to Olo Legato on a Saturday. He sat at the counter because sometimes it helps to sit where hands are busy. The cook measured peppers with rhythm and patience as if metronomes were once invented while someone watched him. The girl had a new puzzle, slightly more difficult, and she found the missing piece before the end. She held it up between pinched fingers, a small victory flag that had no enemies to wave at. Laughter is a sound that belongs to the body more than to the mouth. He found it without calling it by name. On the way home, he ran his fingers along the hallway wall where paint had a very soft grain, almost a suggestion. He stopped at the bedroom door. Anna folded sheets with the same care one gives a flag after it has seen weather. He rested his forehead on her shoulder blade and felt the little movements of her breathing. They did not promise silence. They did not promise storms. They simply stayed still and let their bodies understand together again what roof means. But life, like the wind that month, still had the habit of arriving colder than it should. One evening, Daniel found a notice stuck to the gatepost, anonymous, printed from a cheap office printer, words trying to be cowardly and loud at once. Be careful with enemies you make at home. He pulled the paper off slowly as if it might bleed if he tore it too fast. In the kitchen, he placed it in the trash and put coffee grounds on top. There is a dignity in suffocating certain words under the smell of something warm. He went to bed and did not tell Anna. He lay and listened to the house. He thought of Marcos not as a villain but as a boy who had learned the wrong way to keep a family together. Press the world under your palm until it stops moving. He thought of Anna, learning a softer lesson that still required steel, to step out from under the palm, even if the hand belongs to someone you love. The next day, the mailbox held a letter from the new management. Numbers again, these marching with a decent rhythm. Projected costs, bids in open, view, a calendar where emergency finally returned to its proper meaning. He placed the letter flat on the table and smoothed it with his palm. He had never thought a spreadsheet could be a love letter, but there it was. We will not surprise you. We will not call quiet by another name. Anna's mother visited the following Sunday. The mother had the careful eyes of someone who has watched storms and learned to see which clouds are just clouds. She sat at the table and folded the napkin into a small triangle that did not need to be folded. She looked at Anna, and then at Daniel, and then at Clara, and then at her hands. When she spoke, she lowered her voice, not because she had something to hide, but because she had something to protect. When we were young, Marcos knew how to get people to move, she said, and her mouth made move like a wheel that had been oiled too often. Your father liked the quiet after the noise. I liked the quiet before it. We chose wrong lessons for our children. She took Anna's hand the way one takes a bird from a window and helps it find air again. I am sorry for what fear did in our house. Apologies do not fix wood rot, but they tell the termites they are seen. Something in Anna's shoulders descended from her ears. That week, Daniel met with the accountant in a small office that smelled like lemon cleaning spray and black coffee. The accountant had that habit some honest people acquire of answering the question asked, no more. He drew boxes on a legal pad, and inside each box he wrote a word: contracts, oversight, reserve, vote. He circled vote and tapped the circle with the blunt end of the pen. This is where responsibility lives. Daniel nodded as if responsibility were a neighbor whose name he had forgotten and had finally remembered at a barbecue. He began attending more than just meetings. He visited 3 neighbors he had never spoken to beyond nodding at, learned that one kept her late husband's toolbox untouched in the garage because the sound of the latches still brought him into the room for a second, learned that another had a knee that forecast rain more reliably than the app, learned that a third kept 2 extra chairs under his stairs, just in case someone needs to sit. He learned that when you ask people for their story, they give you their key. At night, he wrote down what he had done that day, not out of compulsion but to prove to himself that days can be filled with what you choose. He wrote small things, tightened the loose hinge on the cabinet, asked Clara what the wind smelled like today, paid the electric, kissed Anna's hand before sleep. He read the list and found it heavy in the hand and light in the heart. Marcos's absence did not feel like forgiveness. It felt like the space after thunder when you wait to see whether there will be another. Anna sometimes stared out the window after dinner, the way people look at a door that won't be knocked on anymore and can't decide if that is relief or grief. Once she cried without shaping her mouth to cry, tears slipping out as if they had discovered a new seam. Daniel did not move to fix it. He sat beside her and held his breath quiet so her breathing could be the only sound. After some minutes, she wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand like a child and said, "He changed diapers with one hand and signed contracts with the other." And they both laughed because that was true and unhelpful and full of love and the kind of sentence no one who hates could write. Clara's teacher sent a note with a drawing. Clara had drawn a house with 3 windows and a cat with both eyes. The sun had lines out of it like a child believes light behaves. At the bottom, in letters still negotiating with the lines on the page, Clara wrote, "My house is brave." Daniel put the paper on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon and stood looking at it long enough for the kettle to begin to fuss on the stove. Some stories end with celebrations. This one ended with a dinner where no one raised a voice and no one left their chair. The chicken had too much rosemary because Daniel had measured with his heart, and Anna kissed his jaw and said, "Perfect," and meant, "Thank you," and "I'm here," and "Let's not have dessert because I want to fall asleep early with you beside me." Clara told a long story about a girl who found a puzzle piece in a shoe and quietly slid it into the space where it belonged without anyone noticing and felt like a magician. They listened as if it were news from a far country they'd always wanted to visit. Later in the dark, Daniel ran his palm over the wall by the bed. The paint had set. The cracks, small as hunger after bread, remained. He imagined years moving through the room, setting down mornings and picking up nights. He imagined the wind that had started it all finding the window again and seeing it closed, moving on. There is no moral. There is only this. A family chose truth where silence had asked to be served. A man spoke softly and did not apologize for not being loud. A woman who learned to be led stepped out of the harness and kept walking. A child stopped expecting doors to open with storms behind them. A house stood still. A condo returned to being a place for lives rather than a factory for fees. Somewhere, a brother learned nothing or learned something or learned slowly. That's his story. This one is about the day everything changed and nothing exploded. It was just a wind, too cold for the month, a letter under a door, a question at a table, a no, said with a calm that finally found its echo. Months later, he woke at 5:18 again. The clock glowed the same fish tank glow. He lay and listened. No thin sound at the window, just the soft hiss of the city exhaling. He waited a beat to see whether unease would come sit on his chest. It didn't. Anna turned and placed her hand on his chest automatically, as if some part of her had decided in sleep to keep choosing him. He counted to 10 because once he had read that counting respects the world's pace. Then he rose, careful with the floors, and went to the kitchen. The light was still yellow, but it had become the warm kind. He started coffee. He put 2 mugs out. He pulled Clara's lunchbox close and wrote her a note on the napkin with a black marker. "The wind smells like clean shirts today." He drew a little puzzle piece, a square with one small bubbled edge. On the walk to school, Clara held his hand and swung. It a motion that insists on joy. The sky above the street was the color of a soft t-shirt. A neighbor sweeping his front step nodded and asked whether the new management would finally fix the lamp that blinked all night by the gate. Daniel said yes. The neighbor said good, and then added, "I'm glad you asked that question that night." It was the kind of sentence men say to other men only on sidewalks in the morning, when there's nothing between them but air and a broom and the belief that asking is worth something. At Olo Legato, the cook lifted his chin in greeting without stopping the knife. The girl on the stool had moved up to a puzzle of a whole city with bridges and buses and tiny people. One piece remained for the bridge. Daniel watched her scan the table, eyes precise in the way of children. She found it under the corner of a paper napkin, slid it into place with a small, satisfied sound. There is a click you can hear if you are quiet when a piece finally takes its shape, in the shape it was meant for. He carried that sound back through the wind. He unlocked his door and stepped into his house and felt something he couldn't name for a second. It wasn't victory. It was not relief the way people perform relief. It was the feeling of a nail sleeping in wood, unafraid of waking up to the weight of a hammer. It was home. He set his keys in the bowl by the door. He placed his hand flat on the wall as if the house had a chest you could feel rise. He breathed with it. He stood there, the minutes lengthening, and laughed under his breath at the idea that some days change everything without anyone noticing, except the wall, the wind, a piece of paper, a man folding sheets, a child learning to trust wood and hinges again. He laughed, and then he did what days always ask to be done. He began it. He began the day.